There are three things you need to make sure your table is perfectly aligned to get those straight cuts. First, your fence has to be aligned with your miter slot. Second, your miter slot needs to be aligned with your saw blade. Third, your saw blade has to be at a 90-degree angle. The first thing I'm going to show you is how to make your blade parallel to your miter slot. There are many ways to do this. The easiest way would be to use a sawed dial gauge. If you have one, I highly recommend using one. The second common way of doing it is using a combination square. Third, using a ruler with a slider like I am here. There are many other ways to do it, but I feel those are the three most common. First, what you want to do is have the end of your ruler against your tooth lightly. Then what you want to do is move your tooth and your ruler to the back. It should feel and grip about the same. As you can see, it doesn't with mine. It lifts the ruler right up and doesn't let go. That means it's not aligned. Adjusting it is very simple. There are two Allen keys on the back of the saw. Grab a number 5 Allen key and loosen those off. Now your saw blade should move freely left and right. Simply align it front and back and then snug up the Allen keys. Once you have them snug, check it again and make sure it's still aligned. Now you can tighten it all the way down. Be careful when you tighten it, it can slightly throw off the alignment. So after you've tightened it, make sure you check again that it's still aligned. Alright, step 1's all done. Now let's move on to aligning the fence to the miter slot. The easiest way to do this is find a square, one of the larger ones if you have them, put it in the miter slot, lock the fence down up against it lightly. Then you'll want to slide your square back and forth, making sure there's no gap forming and that you can slide it all the way to the front and all the way to the back. If that is the case, like I have here, you're good to move on to the next step. If you find it's binding or there's a large gap forming, you'll need to adjust it. You can adjust it by loosening off the 2 screws in the front, and there are also 2 screws in the back. Simply put your square in, align it, and then tighten it down. Okay, second step's all done. Now let's move on to the third step, making sure your saw blade's at a 90-degree angle. There are many ways you can do this. A lot of people use the square technique where you put it up against the saw blade, making sure not to be up against the tooth and making sure there's no gap. If you don't see a gap, odds are you're square. Another way people check it, which is basically the same, is either using a machinist square or a 90-degree square. Exact same process, make sure you're not up against a tooth and make sure there's no gap. The way I like to check for 90 is using a digital angle finder. I find them to be way more accurate and just simpler to use. I'll leave a link in the description for all the tools used in this video. To use it, simply set it on the table, zero it out, and then set it on the saw blade. If it says 90 degrees when it's on the saw blade, you're good. If it's not at 90 degrees, you'll need to adjust it. You can easily adjust it by using an Allen key where I'm pointing. You'll probably need to move your saw blade out of the way, and then you can loosen it or tighten it as needed. If you leave your digital angle finder on the blade, you'll be able to see when you hit 90. As you can see, I hit 90 degrees perfectly on the blade and 0 on the table. So it is perfectly at 90 degrees. Now what I like to do, just to make sure I did everything right, is cut a piece of wood on 2 sides using something that I know is square, and if I see no gaps, I'm good. If you found this video helpful, I'd appreciate if you hit the like button. And thanks to all of our supporters, it means a lot to us.